Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to Marketing Live for Thursday, August 27th, 2015. Marketing Live is part of the Higher Ed Live Network, a series of professional development web shows and podcasts which are always free and accessible to you in the archives at higheredlive.com and on iTunes. The Higher Ed Live Network offers viewers direct access to the best and brightest minds in education and allows viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in the industry. I'm Rob Zinkan. I serve as Associate Vice President for Marketing at Indiana University, and it's another beautiful day on the IU campus in Bloomington, Indiana, as fall classes are underway this week. I invite you to be part of our broadcast by sharing your insights and asking questions using the Higher Ed Live hashtag on Twitter. Also, you can receive weekly updates with live show dates and times by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. Today's show would not be possible without our partners from mStoner and FormStack. Marketing Live is produced by mStoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Two never-before-released chapters from mStoner's books, Social Works and Follow the Leader, are now available for download as audio chapters. We're tweeting out a link where you can download these chapters for free and learn more about mStoner's helpful resources. FormStack is an online form builder and your go-to tool for higher ed website conversions. FormStack makes it easy for marketers to create branded, mobile-ready web forms without writing code, build donation forms, application forms, event registrations, and more with the web's only Section 508 compliant form builder. Interact with your audience on social media using FormStack's Facebook tab or social media autofill features. And for even more conversions, use FormStack's robust analytics data to refine your form. FormStack also partners with popular marketing applications so you can nurture your leads more effectively. Visit formstack.com to learn more about the ways FormStack can double your response rates and increase conversions today. Thanks again to both mStoner and FormStack. Today, we are going to discuss the right balance, the relationship between your comprehensive fundraising campaign brand and your institutional brand. And I'm delighted to welcome two outstanding marketing colleagues and experienced higher ed communicators to the show. First, Charlie Melichar. Charlie is Senior Consultant and Principal Strategic Communications at Martz & Lundy, a full-service fundraising consulting firm with an international client base. Charlie has more than 15 years' experience in the nonprofit communications sector, advising leaders in building campaigns in support of fundraising and engagement strategies. Prior to joining Martz & Lundy, Charlie served as Associate Vice Chancellor at Vanderbilt University, leading development and alumni relations communications and supporting its successful $1.94 billion fundraising campaign. And he also served as Vice President for Public Relations and Communications at Colgate University. Charlie, welcome. Great to have you on the show.
That's great to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
And for those who may not be familiar, Charlie, with Martz & Lundy, tell us a little bit more about your firm and how you're engaged in the higher ed space.
Sure. So Martz & Lundy is a fundraising consultancy. We work with nonprofits across all sectors, heavily in higher ed, but conservation, schools, and museums and parks. And my practice in particular is strategic communications. So doing all the work that you described for the kind of jobs that I've had in the past, I work with universities and colleges, large and small, to help them figure out what their philanthropic brand is, what their voice is, and how to effectively make a case for support. A lot of that work does end up being the crossover between the campaign brand and the institutional brand and the people who manage each. And a lot of times they're different sets of people, and a lot of times there are different views on how the communication should be handled. So it should be a fun conversation.
Great. We'll get all those views out on the table today. So welcome also to Paul Redfern. Paul is Executive Director of Communications and Marketing at Gettysburg College. He has served in multiple roles there at his alma mater, including Director of Web Communications and Marketing. He and his team are responsible for enhancing the college's visibility and reputation, and the college has experienced more than 100% increase in media attention during Paul's tenure. He's active in numerous professional organizations such as CASE and is a frequent blogger. In fact, he just wrote earlier this week a great post on the Call to Action blog on Inside Higher Ed on working with your advisory board. Paul, thanks for joining today.
Great, thank you. Good to be here. Looking forward to it.
And for some additional background, give us a sense of how your role at Gettysburg, leading communications and marketing there, interfaces with the development staff and fundraising function there.
Sure. So we have three objectives to our integrated marketing plan at Gettysburg, which are not unlike probably many of the objectives that many of the people listening in have. We have an objective of national visibility, we have an objective around enrollment, and then we have the third objective around engagement and fundraising for alumni, parents, and friends. So we work quite closely with the development division, whether it's on annual giving, whether it's on donor relations, whether it's on our Orange and Blue Club, which is our athletic fundraising, and as well as campaign fundraising and strategy too. So everything from print to web and in between signage, we do all of that in collaboration with them.
Great. Well, two outstanding guests, and before we delve into the topic, I would like to give listeners an opportunity to learn a little bit more about you beyond your bio information. So is there anything else that you'd like to share about your professional journey, specific experience, or something that has had a lasting impact along the way that may help viewers and listeners get a better sense of your professional experience and all that you're bringing to the table in your current role? Charlie, you want to kick that off?
Sure. I mean, I don't know if that it's anything specific or any particular experience that I had. You know, I've benefited from a lot of mentors. A lot of people have, over the course of my career, have taken a chance on me or given me a shot. And you know, I think it's those opportunities that I've had to try something that I probably had the potential to succeed in, but didn't maybe have all of the experience. And I've just always had a willingness to, not even just a willingness, kind of an appetite to jump into those kind of experiences, and that's been what's made my career fun and exciting, and I think gotten me to the point I'm at. I'm always kind of looking for something new. I'd say specifically on the fundraising part of it, you know, I've always been driven by, you know, the why of the work. You know, how do I know if it worked? So that's given me a bit of an analytical bent to it, and I just find, you know, the direct line between you know, you kind of set up a case, you kind of build a case for support, and then you can see it unfold over the course of time, and that's kind of drawn me to the advancement part of it. And then finally, just I love being around people. So the council part of it, you know, really working with teams to help them figure out how they can best work together. I think those kind of opportunities I've had over the course of my career have kind of shaped how I've gotten here.
Terrific. Thanks, Charlie. And Paul, how about you? Give us some insight on your story and your professional journey.
So I have a sort of a funny story to share about one of the first meetings I was ever in with my my mentor and my current boss. I was coaching at the time, and we were in a meeting with athletics and admissions, trying to get the two to work together. And I was sitting next to her, and it was you know, I was trying to make a really nice point, and I went like this with my arm and knocked over a Diet Coke can and spilled it all over not only her but her paperwork and everything else, myself. It was a really great way to make a first impression. And the part of it that I remember is the grace at which she handled it. You know, as she's sort of cleaning up the mess that I've made and, like, you know, swabbing on my shirt. You know, I felt like, wow, this is one of those resume days. You know, better go get the resume ready. But the way she handled that, and then watching her as a leader in our organization for the last 10 years, and how she handles, you know, bringing in new staff members, how she handles conversations with people, how she handles making sure that she's hearing from the foot soldiers that are out there across our division. I've really taken that to heart as I've come up now through the leadership chain and try to do a lot of those similar things, that listening piece that I think she's so good at. So a little bit of fun there to give you a sense of my personality, but also that idea that as a leader in your organization, whether it's in communications or development or anywhere else, you got to do that listening piece as well.
Great. Thanks for sharing the story, and let's get right to the central question, and then we can peel the onion back from there. We know a comprehensive fundraising campaign is a unique moment in the life of an institution, a defining era that can propel a college or university to greater heights. It's clear that the fundraising campaign brand should be in concert with the institutional brand, but how and to what degree? So ultimately, where should a campaign brand land in relation to an institutional brand? Who wants to kick it off?
I mean, I could kind of give you my, some of my initial thoughts on this, and then kind of let Paul jump in. So I always like to say the campaign brand is the institutional brand. When you pull those things apart, it just doesn't make an awful lot of sense, right? So the campaign is not about the campaign. I mean, the campaign is a vehicle to advance the institution, and for that reason, you're giving to the campaign, but what you're doing is really helping fuel the future of the university or college. So when a campaign brand is created that's either ahead of or next to or behind an institutional brand, I think it kind of misses the point. That the interplay between the two needs to be really really tight and compelling and interesting. And I think it's just, all eyes are on, not all eyes, but many eyes are on you in a campaign. So it's just a really good opportunity as people are paying attention to, okay, why are they doing this? This is a big effort. It's consuming a lot of energy. What are they saying is important right now? What are their values as an institution? And those things are what drive what they're raising money for. So I think it's a missed opportunity when the two aren't tightly integrated.
Yeah, I think, Charlie, a lot of the same thoughts. And when you get right at it and start to peel that back a little bit, I think one of the things is what's the strength of the institutional brand as well. If you don't have a strong institutional brand, then there might be a challenge in that interplay. And can you capitalize on that institutional brand within the campaign component? I think is also an important piece to it. I also think a brand is bigger than a campaign. It's bigger than a president. It's bigger than a marketing campaign. So I think you also have to be careful not to go with something that's so close to your institutional brand that then people get tired of it, and when the campaign's over, they think that's over too. Because it should be your institutional brand should be overarching over all of that.
Yeah, I think those are really important points. And I think the fact that, I was recently talking to one group, and every place has the brand, right? You have a brand, and the brand certainly isn't the colors and the logos and the tagline and all that. And donors in particular, those who can make a large gift, are usually pretty close to the institution. So they've got a pretty good sense of, what the real stuff is, right? So if the campaign brand or the messaging comes off as too surface level or a little bit too slick, they look right beyond that, and they're really trying to get to how does a gift in support of this kind of priority impact the institution and the people who are a part of it, students, faculty, staff, research, things like that. So I think it's really important to be careful about approaching a brand through the lens of kind of tagline, color, logo, case statement, which is easy to jump to because that's the stuff and everybody loves stuff.
And that's 90% of what people think of, too.
Yeah, exactly. So I think you're right that when you've got a really strong brand, when you've got a strong identity, it makes the getting to the priorities a bit easier. But when it's a little bit weaker, the campaign actually presents that opportunity, right, to refine that and really articulate what the institution's all about.
Yeah, I appreciate the perspective, bringing in how the target audience views this, because in my experiences, I've also advocated for that coherence and essentially one unified brand. And one of the reasons you touched on this, Charlie, major gift donors, major gift prospects typically have a deep relationship with the institution. They have multiple points of contact within the institution in terms of relationships with individual faculty, staff, administrators, but also in terms of relationships with programs and specific areas of interest. So when there is that clarity and consistency across the institution, including a big comprehensive campaign, it can be really powerful.
Hey, Charlie, I have a question kind of for you on this topic. I know when we did our RFP for campaign communications, we had two goals. One was to help us meet the fundraising goals of the campaign. The second was to advance the institutional brand. Do you see that when you look at the other kind of colleges and universities that you work with, people thinking of it in those two ways?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think happens, and it's natural, right, is a lot of times you'll have in the early phases of a campaign, the quiet phase, advanced gift phase, and all that. I think you'll see fundraisers kind of managing the advancement division, university relations, whoever it is, kind of managing the process. And there's messaging created as part of that process, and that ultimately should become the brand. Often, as you get into, okay, we've kind of done the due diligence, we know what the campaign priorities are going to be, what the key messages are, who our target donors are, what the goal is, all that. It gets handed off to another office, sometimes public relations, communications, marketing, and then a separate RFP goes out, and that one is for the stuff.
Right.
And that can create a disconnect, right? So you've done all this due diligence, you've had a lot of conversations with donors, and then new messaging gets created, or at least you kind of overlap the two processes.
Right.
I think ideally it's what you just talked about. It's how we're looking at these things as one. And there are some great firms out there that do some really great work that can make that happen. But I think sometimes the internal non-synchronicity can lead to a process that's just a little bit clunky, or sometimes can lead you to, you've done all this work over here, and now we're going to do some different work over here to create a campaign brand. It can be inefficient, and sometimes it can miss the mark. So I think the process you described is the right way to go, and certainly a lot of places do that. But I think there are some places where, again, because of disconnects internally, the process sometimes doesn't play out exactly like that.
Right.
And I do want to touch on that, the topic of the internal disconnects, but I also want to talk about your thoughts on some of the unique elements of brand strategy work around a fundraising campaign, because a critical piece is that sense of urgency and answering the question, why now? Why is now the time for this institution, these initiatives, and the impact that they can make? So what are some of the uniqueness of branding around a comprehensive fundraising campaign? How is the process different than a typical institutional branding work? And what are some of the pieces of advice that you would offer for marketers who are in this position and charged with building the communications and marketing work around a big campaign?
As I was thinking about this question a little bit earlier today, one of the things I thought about was the time frame that you're talking about. When you're building a campaign brand, you're talking about a specific time in the institution's history, maybe 5, 7, 8, sometimes 10, 12, depends on how long it takes you to get there, years. When you talk about building an institutional brand, in an ideal world, that would be a 25-year or a 30-year thing, perhaps, that would live beyond a certain president and live several decades. So I think that the time piece is one of the challenges, one of the differences between the two. I also was thinking about internal versus external. That when you're doing an institutional brand, that internal is so important. That the people that are there, your faculty, the students, they all need to really feel like that's them. And that when you're building a brand for a campaign, not that you don't care about the internal piece, because it's important and it needs to reflect the internal piece, but you're really talking to a very specific set of donors as well. So I think the audiences are a little bit different. But interested in Charlie's thoughts as well there.
Yeah, so one of the things I like to do, again, because I think it's easy to kind of jump into the words, is try to really get down to, okay, what are we doing here, right? So we start with 4 questions. The first one is, as you say, kind of why now, then why you, why us, so what? So, and the first and the last are actually my favorites. So the why now gets to your point about urgency, Rob. So it frames it, and the reason I like to start there is gets people to frame the conversation with the world first. So let's not start by talking about college X or university Y. Let's talk about what's going on in the world. Are there economic realities, social realities? Are there technological challenges out there, economic? What are the things out there that concern you in the world that need to be addressed? Next question, why us? So why this institution? So you take the top 3 or 4 issues that are really challenging right now, and how are we positioned uniquely, differently, well, or maybe not as well as we need to be to address those issues? So now you've taken kind of a big global issue, you've taken it down to the point you say, we can do this. We have the stuff that's going to take to address this. So that's why now, why us, why you, is where you start talking about the donor community. Paul, to your point, that So it's not just us kind of standing here staring at each other. There are a group of private supporters out there, corporate supporters, who can, individuals and donors, who have a passion for those issues, believe in your institution's ability to execute, and through the campaign, you can create solutions, right? And then the so what is, I think, the hardest is the following your shot. So we've identified the issues, we have solutions, we've connected with a group of donors who believe in our ability to do it, and they've funded it. What happens? So to be able to follow the shot forward and say, we're going to launch a $2 billion campaign, here are the 10 things that, if we're successful, will happen. And folks tend to be a little bit nervous about that one, but donors want that, right? I mean, donors want to know that you can say, sure, things might change over the course of time, but these are the things that we're prepared to do as a result of investment in the university or the college at this time through the campaign. So I think those questions, Rob, to your original question here, are probably similar to the ones that we tend to ask in a broader campaign, but it's way more focused on action reaction. What's going on? How can we address it? What are we going to do? And then what is the impact? And I think Paul, you were saying kind of the timeline is shorter. People are expecting some kind of return that, endowed gifts last forever, but there's still annual things can be done for a long time based on people's investment in the campaign. So it's really giving people a line of sight to impact.
How will the institution, one of the questions we asked was, how will the institution be different at the end of the campaign than it is today, as a way to sort of get at some of those questions, Charlie?
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I also think it's, the world changes, right? So there's, in some ways, you want to be able to say, these are the kind of things that we've been able to do. We've got a track record here. We know you care about this place and the things that either if you were a student it did for you, or a supporter who kind of believes in programs. But the world's moving fast, and we've got to figure out how to balance what our core strengths have been and what the world needs us to be for the students and for the people we impact beyond campus today and into tomorrow. And those are really interesting conversations, and it's pushing as folks from a communications background, kind of pushing for kind of more substantive answers that aren't just kind of sound good, right? So what does it mean? What does a program look like? What does the staffing look like? What does the impact on students and others look like?
And then connecting that back to work with the institutional brand. And institutional brands are typically, first and foremost, targeting prospective students as the primary target audience. And I think it's interesting that as careers and outcomes have now trumped everything else in the college selection process for prospective students and their parents, well, the core of a comprehensive fundraising campaign brand is about outcomes and about impact. So just with that change on perhaps work with the institutional brand, does that at all present more opportunities for alignment when you talk about, well, there's campaign brand as part of or linked to, separate from, the same as, some relationship, hopefully close relationship, with the overall institutional brand and for prospective students?
Yeah, can I answer that by asking Paul a question?
Ask away.
So in some ways, don't you think it's, at the core of both, we're trying to get to, what do we stand for? So for me talking to a prospective student or their parent and family, not just what programs do we have, but what do we stand for in the world? I mean, what does this institution value? And I think the same thing for donors, right? I mean, they want to know, investment. We picked these things to put in our campaign because these are the things that we believe in and stand for. So what do you think? I mean, does that sound right?
That sounds right. Is there a second part to that, or you want me to?
No, then if it does, why?
So I think that sounds right, and I think Charlie used to be in this world. Now he's in a slightly different world now, where he can say, does that sound right? That sounds perfect. Easier said than done, for sure. I think that you have a hard time, and we'll use Rob's example of outcomes. Let's say a school is going to, as a part of their campaign, raise X millions of dollars so that we can do X number of internships and externships and all the things that we know our institutions need to do around outcomes. That seems like the perfect thing for an enrollment manager to be able to take to the admission staff and say, let's talk about this and the institutional commitment that's happening around outcomes. But I don't know that enrollment managers always make that jump. I think that they wait for that gift to come in, and what is it, and what's the story I can tell around it. I think it's really hard to get the admissions offices integrated into those campaign talking points and to make the jump between this is important to the institution because we're raising money for it, and that's why you should be interested as a prospective student. I've been unsuccessful at that so far, but I think it's an opportunity as we move forward for institutions for sure.
Paul, I mentioned that your work blogging for Inside Higher Ed, the Call to Action blog, and you wrote something recently also more specific to digital, and certainly you bring a strong background in web and digital. And just curious how that experience and expertise has informed your perspective on this topic related to fundraising campaign branding.
Well, so I came up through the admissions office. That's where I started in athletics, and then came up through the admissions office and work in the enrollment division. So I report to the vice president for enrollment. So that creates a whole different set of unique challenges when you talk about campaign branding. But I think that the digital experience has allowed us to put more integration into the campaign communications in the campaign brand. And how are we going to integrate campaign messaging into the stories on the website, into our digital and our social? How can we use some of the interesting things that we're seeing coming out right now in social media, and I'll use advertising loosely, but basically dollars you can put into Facebook targeting. How can we use that in terms of the campaign, not always to get the gift side, but to create the excitement side of our campaign communications? So I think a lot of the experience there we're able to translate, and we're seeing some success with.
That's great. And just to add to that the whole idea of integration is, it's one of those words you almost want to stop using because it's like, all right, already we get it. Integration is good. But I'd say that there's maybe a different word we could use is education. So people are coming to these roles from a lot of different perspectives, either kind of a straight web marketing background, admission, advancement, media relations, public relations, whatever it is. So sometimes I think people assume too much about what people know, and then they put up walls when they don't know it, right? So I think this happens in fundraising a lot, where you've got, whether it's the campaign or an annual fund program or something, there's a lot of good thinking that goes into that, and sometimes it doesn't get executed great on the communications end just because the time wasn't taken to say, here's how this fits into the big picture. So I think somehow finding ways for people to get into a room and understand why certain things are important to a recruitment and admission program, external relations, whether it's government relations, depending on your institution, fundraising, if it's a campaign or not. I think somehow finding the opportunity to just get people talking about why you would say different things to different audiences, it kind of sticks in your head. So it's not this, I've got this list of things to do, now let me insert campaign messaging here because that's what I'm supposed to do now. I think it's, kind of to your point of how it's playing out in social, it's got to be part of the story. And if it's not, it just ends up being, it's too easy to ignore because it's like the advertising section in a magazine. If it's overall part of, here's how we talk about institutional momentum, something good happens, and something good happens that was made possible by philanthropy, that is kind of a mental check that, okay, good, philanthropy is a good thing. I mean, that's kind of it. The implied message is almost kind of enough in a lot of cases. So I think giving people the opportunity to kind of talk about why these different things are important and how they play out from a communication standpoint, what works, what doesn't. It can be hard to take the time to do those things, but I think it helps people in the moment and also professionally to have better access to those kind of programs.
I mean, two quick examples, Charlie, from my work at Gettysburg. One would be, our magazine. We just launched publicly the campaign and we called it a leadership phase as opposed to silent or some of those other ones, right? We were really crafty with that. So we launched last fall. But if you look at our previous 3-4 years of magazines, you will see articles, profiles, the case being made for the campaign priorities. we didn't come right out and say, hey, this is, scholarships, and we're trying to raise money for scholarships. But over and over and over again, you saw that. I think part of that was because we were brought in at the earlier side to campaign communications, but the ability to say, hey, with these stories, here's what we need to be talking about leading up to the launch. And then on the video side, the digital side, it happened just recently. We were making a video for admissions. It was about a student who, has studied all over the world, right, has done all these great things, and is now going to take that and use it in his career. So we've got the video almost complete, and it clicks in my head that, this is a student that only had that opportunity because there was a gift made, and we were able to add one more student to this particular international bridge course. And by adding that one line into text on one of the text slides of the video, all of a sudden we made that a campaign video too. We actually put a different ending on it. For admissions, it's gettysburg.edu, learn more. On the campaign site, it's the campaign logo on the campaign website, and boom, it's two uses. But you've got to have that knowledge base and that ability to do that, those types of things, and be okay with, we're going to have the same video and a slightly different message at the end.
Mm-hmm. And that's the ideal, right? And I imagine that, you're doing all the right stuff. So I imagine there are folks out there who aren't in that position. And I think one of the things that you alluded to that makes all the difference in the world, I think, is getting in early. Mm-hmm. And I think the brands diverge when the campaign brand that process starts too late. So I'd say, once you start hearing people say the word campaign on campus, sidle up to whoever is in charge of that conversation. Even if they say, well, we probably don't need communications yet. They do. They just might not know what kind of communications they need. So I would volunteer to be at the meetings, ask to get on the agenda and just be around it, because in that early phase when stuff isn't being produced yet, you'll play a counseling role, you'll bring perspective, you'll learn, and then when it comes time to say the kind of things like, well, we're going to have one video that serves multiple purposes, the answer isn't no, we need a campaign video, because that happens, that kind of thing does happen when communications is brought in too late, marketing is brought in too late. So I'd say get in there as early as humanly possible, because you're by virtue of that, you're going to be a part of it from the very beginning.
If you take away one thing from today, take away the last point that Charlie just made. That's maybe the most important point today.
Just a quick reminder, if any viewers do have tips to share, questions for our guests, please feel free to tweet those using the Higher Ed Live hashtag. And I know we've touched on this, but do want to spend some more time and get into the topic of organizational structures and all the implications and complexities around that and how that touches this issue. And I want to start with the rise of the CMO position and branding in general in higher ed, and how that has changed or potentially changed the landscape when it comes to branding for a comprehensive fundraising campaign. So certainly it's had an implication on organizational structures, but how have you seen with both of your experiences in higher ed with the changing role of marketing, what impact has that had when it comes to fundraising campaigns and the branding marketing work around those?
Charlie, you want to?
Sure. Yeah. So personally, I've worked in public relations within advancement as a direct report to the president, and as the kind of the person running advancement and alumni communications as my full role, kind of completely out of the context. So I've had a bunch of different kinds of scenarios, and through my work now as a consultant, I see a lot of different kinds of scenarios. And my main takeaway from my experiences in seeing is that there is no single formula, and that it comes down to relationships and openness of communication. That you could spend an awful lot of time trying to create the perfect organizational structure that matches kind of what the best of breed is, and not get the work done. So I think it comes down to where are we properly devoting energy to all the different things we need to devote energy based on institutional priority, and by all of the things I'm thinking campaign and everything else. I think that has a lot to do with structure. I think the relationship between, and this for the purposes of this conversation, the relationship between advancement, development, or whatever you want to call it, and communications or marketing, whatever you want to call that, is essential. And if the lines of communication aren't open and the relationship isn't really really effective, it doesn't matter what your structure is going to be. And the president or the chancellor, whoever the leader, has everything to do with that. So I think it really comes down to those really basic things, which I know isn't a really direct answer, but I think again that we could spend a lot of time kind of defending, it needs to be over here, it needs to be over here, and I think there's something fundamental that is more important than just where it lives. It's kind of how are people working with each other.
I would totally agree, Charlie, and I'm in the one experience that Charlie doesn't sound like he's had, which is reporting to the enrollment manager, and as part of the communication shop, and that it gets it's a little tricky at times if you don't have a good relationship with your boss, in my case the vice president for enrollment, and the confidence that she I think has in me to have a relationship with the vice president of development. And be able to go and sit with the vice president for development and the campaign communications, and that confidence that we're going to be able to do that. We're also going to be able to achieve the goals we have on visibility and enrollment, and that it all plays a role. It really doesn't matter who you report to. It matters who the people are you have in the role, and are they the right people, and are they getting the job done.
And do you have that direct line to your president, chancellor, whoever's the primary, the leader of your institution? Do you have their ear? Do they have yours? And I'd also make the argument that, Rob, going all the way back to the beginning in terms of kind of experiences that have shaped my career, having to sit in front of the board of trustees at an institution really early on in my career dramatically impacted how I think about my work, because these are the people who are making the decisions and who have a lot of influence, not just on today but on tomorrow, and you've got to keep those stakeholders in mind. So if you're too many steps away from leadership of the institution, I think as a communications person you're not being fully utilized, and you're probably not in a position to provide the best counsel and overall institutional support. But like Paul said, from there, I'm not really sure it totally matters where you are. Again, it kind of comes down to context.
Yeah, and Charlie, I like to say you haven't really lived until you've had to do a presentation in front of the full board.
Well, one thing that came to mind, I think that's a great point, that it's not about the structure or the setup, but about the work and the relationships. And we had our annual Big Ten marketing conference earlier in the summer, and now with Rutgers and Maryland as part of the conference, I found it fascinating just to see across our conference there is so much diversity in where marketing fits in the organization. Is it with communications? Is it not with communications? Is it part of advancement? What's the relationship with advancement? It differs across all the institutions. Certainly not one model, and I think that's because there is no one model. Just as you said, it really depends on the culture within the institution, what works best, what are the relationships. So I do like how you frame that, but it is, at the end of the day, it still is higher ed,
Right.
And there are likely some silos that exist, no matter what that organizational chart looks like. So when those silos do exist, how do you, and I know you've hinted at some of this, but how do you go about breaking those down and addressing those when there are some barriers in place based on those structures?
I have always used the face-to-face. You can get a lot done over email, you can get a lot done over the phone, but when you really hit that silo, and you really hit that, there is nothing like going and sitting down face-to-face. And in this particular case that we're talking about, it's often with either the campaign director or the vice president in charge of that development division, and saying, hey, here's what we're running into, or here's the challenge, or whatever it might be. Can we talk it through? Can we talk about it? Can we figure out a solution? Because we both know that's what the institution needs. And when you come back to what the institution needs, what we need to get this done for the campaign, and that's what you focus on, I think you can bust through some of those things.
Yeah, I would just kind of second what you just said. I mean, it comes down to, again, the relationships, articulating the goals, and having a plan. I mean, having a plan that you can work from that's at a pretty high level. It's not, here's what we're going to do in September. I mean, ultimately you do need that, but when you can say, here are our top 3 or 4 priorities that are institutional, and here's how we're going to, individually attack them, and here's we're going to attack them in a shared way, and then here's what success looks like. Again, one of my favorite phrases is directional accuracy. Well, let's not worry so much about knowing exactly what the path is, but let's know where we're going together and then go. And so we're doing stuff. And then when things happen, kind of if you have to reset or you have to get together, talk about it, great. Otherwise, just keep going, get the work done. So I think, Paul, you're absolutely right. Sitting down with the person or whomever it is, people, and just kind of keeping the ball rolling and people's eyes set as high as possible, that I never try to guarantee that it won't be hard, but you can erase the hard and important quadrant. So let's not have a lot of drama in that really high pressure quadrant. And if the ticky-tacky stuff is annoying, that's kind of like, that's work, right? So keep your eyes set high.
And Charlie, you bring in the perspective with Martin Lundy and working with not just higher ed institutions, but other nonprofit organizations. And so I'm sure you've seen this play out in all sorts of different manners, and depending on where you're coming into the process. But when things do go off the rails, or maybe not go off the rails, but when there are challenges along the way, where do you see that most frequently happening, and why does that occur? Where are those key pain points around the campaign communications and overarching brand when you work with an organization or an institution?
Yeah, I think it's all about relationship and communication. That's why I usually start there with structure, is that it didn't start early enough. So usually it's by the time communications or marketing is brought in, it's late and everybody knows it, right? So in order to really inform the brand, you needed information that was gathered before you were at the table. So now you're kind of playing catch up, and you're being asked to just produce stuff, where communicators come to it from a different level, right? We kind of come to it from a more we come to it at a more strategic level than maybe you would have had the opportunity to now that you've been introduced, because we need a case statement or a website. So it's not starting early enough. Sometimes it's lack of trust. I would be lying if I said that I've never heard a communicator say, I don't do fundraising stuff. And I'd also be lying if I said I never heard a fundraiser say, communication is really just about the brochures and stuff, so I think sometimes there's a lack of understanding and trust, and that just creates a wall. So it's, not communicating well enough, sometimes lack of trust, and then, again, not taking the time early enough to just say, help me understand what you do and why this is important and what the difference between a major gift prospect is and a planned giving donor. I mean, the lexicon, and help me understand what the difference between is a brand and a logo. So over assuming what each party knows can lead to just more kind of, it's like throwing a bolt into the engine. If you get that stuff out early, it makes it a lot easier.
I think, Charlie, too, when you're in it, when you start to use certain language, that it can be really helpful to you. We win together, we lose together. Our goals are your goals, and heck, I'm in the foxhole with you. The campaign success is my success. So we're in it together, and how are we going to succeed together? I think those types of things also go a long way in starting to build that trust. That I'm not just out to, I've got so much time, I've got to do this campaign thing, and here we're going to do it, and then I'm going to get back to the real job that I have. I think when you come at it from a different approach, you can start to build that trust.
Yeah, and I think what you're not saying, you just kind of bring it to the table just by virtue of being who you are, but kind of approach the work with enthusiasm and a sense of positivity.
Yeah.
Even when you might not really feel enthusiastic or positive, So I think that goes a long way, right? I mean, trying to be the person at the table who has a great attitude all the time. I mean, that's not magic, but it's not always easy. but I think it makes a difference.
I would agree.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a great takeaway. Well, you guys have been great. In wrapping up, any other pieces of advice or things you didn't get an opportunity to share yet that you would pass along to fellow marketers who are working through these and other issues in their work as they try to move their institutions forward through philanthropic support?
The one thing I would just add is something that Charlie just talked about. In terms of asking questions about, major gift prospect and planned gift prospect. And it's one thing for you as the CMO to know those things, but you got to translate that down to your staff too, because they're the ones that are going to be implementing the work. They're the ones that are going to be building the website. They're the ones that are going to be writing the stories. And if they don't know that, and then they're talking to a development officer, you're going to break all the trust that you've built if all of a sudden they don't know the difference between the annual fund and the endowment. And so translate what you're learning right back down to your staff, and you'll have a greater chance for success.
Yeah, I would say just do what Paul says. I mean, he says all the right things, right? I mean, the only thing I could add is just, again, it's attitude. It's be curious, take smart risks, be enthusiastic about it. Try to find a way to love what you're doing. And I think, again, even if you don't love everything about what you're doing, give yourself some things that you could look back on either at the end of the day, week, month, year, and say, you know what, that wasn't easy, but it was fun. I learned something. And if you can do that, you're going to be successful.
Terrific. Well, thank you both again. Thanks to Charlie Melichar and Paul Redfern, today's Marketing Live guests, for sharing your time, for offering some excellent insights. So, gentlemen, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks, as always, to M. Stoner for producing and supporting the show, and to FormStack for their continued support of the show as well. Be sure to get reminders about this and other shows by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. You can browse the archives at higheredlive.com or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. So thanks again to Charlie and Paul. I'm Rob Zinkan. Thanks again for tuning in to Marketing Live. We'll be back next month with more great content for you on the Higher Ed Live Network.